Okay. I guess as people begin to join us, we'll just slowly get things started. So, hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar on regional benefit sharing, hosted by Community Power Agency. I'm Elizabeth Noble. I'm a director at CPA. I'm joining you from Jabbergai country in far north Queensland today. It's really great to have such a diverse group of people on the call. So we've got people from council, from government, developers, community groups, as well as industry folk. I think we've had almost 200 people register for this. So it's really, really fantastic. We value having all of these different perspectives working together. And it's what makes this work really meaningful and exciting from our perspective. So CPA is really keen on collaborating with as many people to do this type of work. So we encourage your questions and input throughout the session. We really see this as key to making progress on these issues. So thanks for taking the time to join and to be part of this conversation today. Before we dive in, I'll just give a very quick intro to CPA and also why we've created this guide. So Community Power Agency exists really to make sure that the energy transition delivers not just clean power, but stronger and fairer communities. We connect and activate communities. We interface with government and industry through capacity building, also through the research and advocacy that we do, as well as our own on-ground community engagement. And we do this so that renewable energy projects and policies are actually shaped by and for local people and make sure that local people have a seat at the table. So before we begin, I just want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands that we're each calling in from today. I'm speaking from Jabbergai country, and I recognise the enduring sovereignty, the cultures, and also the knowledge systems of First Nations peoples. This land was never ceded. In the work that we do at CPA, we're often reminded that the energy transition that's happening is happening on lands where there's still a very deep cultural connection and ongoing custodianship. And often these transitions have excluded and even harmed First Nations peoples. We're really committed to listening and learning and trying to support pathways where First Nations leadership is central and where cultural connection is respected and upheld. So I pay my respects to the elders past and present, and also to any First Nations people who are joining us on the call today. Okay, to kick things off, I just wanted to start with a bit of an overview. And so the new Guide to Regional Benefit Sharing from CPA has been authored by my colleague Claudia Hodge and Kim Malley. Claudia brings experience in community development and stakeholder engagement, and she's been leading CPA's work in this space for the last year or so, along with Kim Malley and Dr. Jara Hicks. So she's going to take us through why we've actually developed the guide, what it covers, and how it can be useful for you. Then we've got three fantastic speakers lined up. So we've got Chris Souness, Veronica Terry, and Sarah Robin, who will share some on-ground perspectives from the different regions that they're from. Finally, we'll have time for some Q&A. So please pop your questions in the Q&A box, which you'll see at the bottom of your Zoom screen as we go along. And you can upvote questions as well. So just like give it a little thumbs up, and that will help us to prioritize which questions we include in the Q&A. My colleague Anna's in the background, and she's going to be sharing those most popular questions with me along the way. Okay, so without further ado, I'll pass over to Claudia Hodge to talk a little bit about the Guide to Regional Benefit Sharing.
Thanks, Liz. And thank you so much to everyone for joining us here today to hear more about our Guide to Regional Benefit Sharing. Joining today from Gadigal country here in Sydney. Before I dive into the guide, I just wanted to give a brief overview of CPA's work on community engagement and benefit sharing more broadly. So as Liz mentioned, CPA's mission is to secure a renewable energy future that creates positive outcomes for people and the planet. We've been delivering on this mission for about 14 years now and work across three main sectors in the energy space. We started out working with communities, helping to grow and develop the community-owned energy sector. So bringing international learnings to Australia on how to do community-owned energy projects, developing business models, grassroots community engagement, and social research. And we continue to deliver this work currently, and it really keeps us up to date with the current sentiments and sort of grounded in community needs. About 6 or 7 years ago, we started working closely with large-scale renewable energy in the large-scale renewable energy industry and the Clean Energy Council, offering advice and writing guidelines on best practice benefit sharing models, some of which you can see sort of on the screen here, as well as ways of doing co-design, co-ownership or co-investment with local communities and delivering great community engagement strategies. The final pillar of our work is with government. We've worked with the ACT, Victorian, Tasmanian, New South Wales, and the federal governments on things like RES policy design, RES meaning Renewable Energy Zone. I know different jurisdictions call that different things, but I'll call it that from now on. And yeah, implementation, as well as writing a number of state-specific industry guidelines. A couple of those are on the screen there as well. So our work across all these three sectors gives us really interesting insights on how to collaborate together for best possible outcomes in the transition to renewable energy. So many of you may have previously read our regional benefit sharing discussion paper authored by my colleagues Dr. Jara Hicks and Kim Malley back in 2023, which really explored why a regionally coordinated approach to benefit sharing presents an opportunity for regions hosting multiple renewable energy projects. Our newly published Guide to Regional Benefit Sharing builds upon that thinking, really focusing on how regional leaders and stakeholders can design and implement effective regional benefit sharing programs tailored to their unique local contexts. I'd like to give credit again to my wonderful colleagues, Kim Malley, who is the lead author of this guide and is currently enjoying a very well-deserved family holiday, which is why it's just me here giving this presentation today. And also to Dr. Jara Hicks, who is currently on maternity leave, but whose thought leadership on regional benefit sharing alongside Kim has also really laid the foundation for this work. I'd also like to thank the many external partners and collaborators who contributed to this guide, such as the Foundation for Regional and Rural Renewal, the Renewable Energy Alliance, the Regional Australia Institute, and the Next Economy, among a few others, whose feedback helped us to refine the content and advice to be most useful for communities at the forefront of the energy transition. So I won't spend too long here, as I know many of you are already very familiar with this, but I think it's important to briefly clarify what we mean by benefit sharing in the context of renewable energy development. So if we were to try and picture a best practice renewable energy project for a moment, it would be a project that brings lasting social and environmental benefits to its host community and the region. The project's benefit sharing strategy would be co-designed with the community and strategically planned to ensure positive, lasting relationships and outcomes for that community. And as a result of this, we would imagine that the project would enjoy strong local support because people would see real value flowing into their region from the project. And this really speaks to the fact that benefit sharing is about recognising that communities deserve to share in the rewards or benefits derived from the monetisation of renewable energy sources like the sun, wind and water that occurs on the land or country that they live on, take care of and build their communities around. It's based on the idea of maintaining positive long-term connections to the area and being a good neighbour by contributing to the future prosperity of the region that hosts the project. And it's by behaving like a contributing member of the community that renewable energy projects are better integrated into and valued by the community who are involved in the planning and co-design of the benefit sharing strategy, creating a sense of shared ownership and empowerment over the outcomes. Just really quickly, for this reason, we don't consider impact mitigation measures like infrastructure contributions to council, which try to mitigate the negative impacts of a project as being a part of benefit sharing. The same goes for things like community sponsorship, which we consider as more neatly part of marketing expenditure and therefore part of the cost of doing business rather than the sharing of the rewards or benefits of a renewable energy project. Okay, so with that in mind, when we talk about regional benefit sharing, we're referring to the strategic aggregation of benefit sharing programs associated with multiple energy projects that are located in a common geographic region. So this might include benefit sharing programs of generation projects, like solar and wind farms, could be storage, so pumped hydro or battery storage systems, transmission projects, and even state government policies around renewable energy zones or RESs that collect things like RES access fees, which can be pulled together with other benefit sharing funds. But it's absolutely essential that efforts to coordinate benefit sharing at a regional level do not compromise the ability for developers or projects to build direct positive relationships with their immediate host neighbours and close surrounding communities. So this diagram, many of you might remember from our first publication on regional benefit sharing, the 2023 discussion paper, and we've included it again in our new guide to regional benefit sharing because it really neatly emphasises the layers or levels that need to be taken into account when designing an effective regional benefit sharing program. So project level benefit sharing will still be really important for the neighbourhood and the close geographic communities surrounding a renewable energy project. And this level of benefit sharing should not be displaced by any attempts to coordinate benefit sharing at a more regional scale, meaning that renewable energy developers still need to negotiate, co-design and build relationships with these close communities that are hosting their project. And from this foundation of strong relationships between project developers and close communities, we can start to explore this idea of regional level benefit sharing, which can help to do things like avoiding duplication across multiple project level benefit sharing programs. It can help to reduce engagement fatigue within communities who are hosting multiple projects. And it can maximize the legacy outcomes by pooling and leveraging resources for greater impact at a regional scale. Oh, sorry, I've skipped too far ahead there. So it's our strong belief that establishing great regional benefit sharing programs must include the features that meet the needs of all stakeholders. So a program that has state government running their own race, council without a seat at the table, or project developers divorced from their host communities won't be able to get the balance right and to create the long-lasting strategic impact that the region wants to see. So, likewise, continuing as we have in the sector on a project by project basis with benefit sharing contributed only to the close surrounding communities, will also not serve those communities in the long term or the renewable energy industry well. So when we're thinking about designing an effective regional benefit sharing program, it's helpful to draw a distinction between how to coordinate benefit sharing funds and what those funds might actually be spent on. When we're talking about how to coordinate benefit sharing, this includes the governance elements such as the geographic scope, the funding sources, principles, functions, terms of reference, who makes decisions, and things like the legal structure for the program. It also feeds into the question of what regional legacy priorities should be funded because it requires us to think about the decision-making process for determining the initiatives that will be funded under the program, including how the community fits into that decision-making process. And it can be quite tempting to sort of skip straight to the question of what regional benefit sharing initiatives should be funded, but it's really vital to think deeply about the how aspect to ensure that there are these robust governance processes, transparency, and accountability in the administration of the program. So for anyone that has had a chance to read our guide to regional benefit sharing, you'll notice that we set out a co-design process for determining how to establish a regional benefit sharing program that's tailored to the unique regional context at hand. So this co-design process will involve regional community leaders, industry and council, aiming to build consensus on a regional benefit sharing proposal that can then be circulated for broader public engagement with the community. One of the aspects that needs to be considered includes the values and motivations for a program, which might include ideas around justice or just transition, being a good neighbour, fostering community, things like that. Agreeing on a core set of values and motivations helps to ground the rest of the co-design process and also build trust and consensus between stakeholders. The next aspect to consider is the scope, which generally refers to the geographic boundary of the program and where you actually draw the lines on the map for encapsulating multiple energy projects in a region. This could be the local government area boundary or a group of LGA or council boundaries. It could also be the res boundary or even a bioregion or some other geographic boundary that makes sense locally. But one thing I would like to stress is that it's important that communities feel connected to the benefits flowing to that region. So the boundaries shouldn't generally be too big or dispersed so as to kind of divorce communities from the outcomes at a more regional scale. There might also be other aspects to the scope of the program, such as which technology types and contributors you'd like to see to receive funding from. So, for example, it might make sense to limit the contributors to renewable energy projects in the first instance, but then there might be a desire later down the track to expand that to other big infrastructure projects happening in the region, or even to philanthropic or government contributions. Related to this is also the question of the value of contributions in terms of how much each renewable energy project or other contributor actually is expected to contribute to the regional benefit sharing program. And I'll come to that aspect in a separate slide in a moment, sorry. But other aspects that need to be considered are the purpose, principles, and functions of the program, which sort of seems to cross over a little bit with the values and motivations, but is generally a lot more specific about the implementation capacity of the program. So, for example, the purposes might include to pool and distribute funds from multiple renewable energy projects, to maximise long-term legacy outcomes, and to avoid duplication of small-scale initiatives. The principles might include to ensure community-led decision-making, transparency and coordination and things like that. And the functions might be as simple as being able to pool and to grant funding to local not-for-profits, or it might be to offer things like scholarships or seed funding for social enterprises. And it's important to think about whether you'd like to see the funding invested to grow the total pool over time, or have the capacity to offer things like revolving loans. Yeah, many options out there. So determining these desired principles and functions is pretty important for the next step, which is to analyse and identify possible legal and formal governance structures for the program. And I'll come back to the legal structures in a moment, but I want to emphasise that once all of this is pulled together to form a regional benefit sharing proposal, that this then needs to go out for wider community engagement and feedback to ensure that there's broad community support and buy-in before implementing this kind of program. So I do want to focus a little bit more deeply on this question of the value of contributions and how much each renewable energy project should be contributing into the regional benefit sharing program. So this is an example of a decision-making process that could be used to determine what proportion of funds should be contributed by each project towards the program. We do recommend that there are minimum benefit sharing standards, usually measured in dollars per megawatt capacity for a project, but we see it as really important for projects to have the flexibility to co-design with their host communities how much of that total benefit sharing budget is directed towards local initiatives with the close communities surrounding a project, and how much is assigned to regional benefit sharing initiatives over time. So, for example, where communities are host to their first large-scale energy project, there's generally a greater need for funding of local community initiatives. But over time, as those initiatives are completed or more energy projects are developed nearby, the desire generally grows to contribute to more regional and longer lasting outcomes, which is when a renewable energy project, together with its host community, might decide to start allocating a greater amount of the total benefit sharing budget towards the regional benefit sharing program. Um, the next thing I want to zoom in on is the legal and governance options or structures for regional benefit sharing programs. So we've broken these down into three broad categories. The first being without a central entity to administer the program. So the idea here is that renewable energy projects that are contributing funding to a regional benefit sharing program would work together, most likely under a partnership agreement or a memorandum of understanding, to coordinate their efforts and deliver on an agreed list of priorities for the region. So rather than pooling funds into a central entity, they would each agree to contribute their funds directly to the initiatives that the region wants to see delivered. There are certain advantages to this approach in that it's fairly easy to set up, but it also requires really strong collaborative relationships between contributors and with community stakeholders for this to actually work in practice. There's also the downside in that it wouldn't generally be possible to pool and invest funding from multiple contributors to grow the total pool of funds over time. Which brings me to the second approach, which is to use an existing entity to pool and administer the funds, such as a local not-for-profit that's really well trusted in the community, or a national foundation like FRRR or the Australian Communities Foundation, or even the local council or a group of councils, if that makes sense. So the obvious advantage of this approach is that you'd be utilising the administrative capacity of an organisation or entity that already exists, which can make it much more efficient and allow you to focus resources on actually delivering the legacy outcomes that the region needs. But it's really important to cross-check that the purposes of the existing entity match that you've co-designed with community for the regional benefit sharing program, and to think about whether the governance mechanisms that are in place for the existing entity can be drawn upon or supplemented to make sure that there's strong community input into the decision-making process for how funds are pooled and administered over time. The third approach is to create a brand new not-for-profit entity to pool and administer the funds. This could be a company limited by guarantee, an incorporated association, a non-distributing cooperative, or even a trust. And I won't go into the details too much because that's all included in the guide. But the major advantage of this approach is that you're really able to tailor the specific legal structure and its governing documents to suit the exact sort of needs and desires of the regional benefit sharing program, and also bake in the community participation in the decision-making aspect. And it also gives you, a great deal of flexibility to ensure that the governance and legal structure of the program is precisely fit for purpose. Of course, the downside is that is a bit more resource intensive, requires some initial investment to establish and administer. So it's really about determining what is the best option in the circumstances, in the unique local context in which you're working. So this is probably the more fun bit, the question of what to spend the funding on. Lots of people might shudder at the thought of another community plan, especially when local councils already have lots of things like strategic plans, infrastructure plans, tourism plans, housing plans, things like that. But we do see it as really, really important for there to be a plan that dictates how, or helps to decide how community benefit sharing funds pooled through a regional benefit sharing program are spent. So the good news is that there's no need to reinvent the wheel or duplicate the work that's already been done. The existing council plans and state government agency plans can be drawn upon to build that legacy plan for spending regional benefit sharing funds. But there does need to be a process to make sure that the plan that's used to guide this regional benefit sharing program is holistic in nature, and it's not necessarily limited to the jurisdiction of local government or state government or any existing plans. So there's always a bit of work to do there. the benefit of this is also that, but in doing that piece of work, there's an opportunity to mitigate the risks of engagement fatigue for communities that are experiencing engagement processes from multiple developers, from multiple projects happening in a region. So by doing that work initially of creating a community plan at a regional scale, we can sort of avoid the duplication of that process as more developers come into the region. This is just a quick nod to a section of the guide which talks about the need for an organisation to lead in the design of a regional benefit sharing program. There's some examples listed there of the types of organisations that we've seen leading this kind of process. One thing that I'd just like to emphasise is that whichever organisation leads the design of the regional benefit sharing program need not necessarily be the organisation to hold, pool and administer the funds. It's important to decide which organisation is going to be best to do that, or if it's necessary to set up a new one to do that. There needs to be a degree of separation between the actual process of co-designing the program and the outcome. So it's great to have an organisation take the lead in facilitating this process, but also a degree of openness as to what the outcome might be. Lastly, I just wanted to touch on harmonising with state government energy policy. So there's opportunities to ensure that a regional benefit sharing program marries in really nicely with emerging state government energy policy. So for example, community engagement and strategic planning that's being undertaken by state government res delivery bodies and other departments can be utilised as a way to do this engagement on regional benefit sharing at the same time, and to make sure that we're not duplicating or over-engaging communities. And with the emergence of things like the pooling of res access fees, and also in jurisdictions like Queensland, where councils are now being asked to negotiate community benefit agreements with developers, this presents an opportunity to crystallize the commitment that a community has decided for that it would like to see to a regional benefit sharing program, and to make sure that there is a degree of buy-in from developers and it's based on community needs. So again, as I reiterated before, even in cases where it is council or a state government body negotiating and being the signatory to these agreements, doesn't necessarily mean that it needs to be that body holding the funds if it doesn't make sense in the local context. So there's some more details on that in the guide. But I just wanted to quickly raise this for anyone that hasn't heard of it. We offer a short course. It's a university accredited short course on socially responsible renewable energy development. It dives into the details of better practice, benefit sharing and community engagement for anyone that would like to go a bit deeper on that. But here are my contact details if you'd like to have a chat more about the guide. And I've gone a little bit over time, so I apologise for that, but I'm going to hand back over to Liz now to throw over to some of our panellists. But thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Claudia. That was great. A really good overview of the guide and sort of the big picture of regional benefit sharing and some of the practical tools that are outlined in the guide. So I just want to reassure everybody that this session is being recorded. We'll send out the recording along with the resources such as the guide. So yeah, we'll make sure that goes out after this session today. I just encourage people to continue popping their questions into the chat. We've got quite a few building up there. What we're going to do now is go to our panelists, and then we'll have a longer Q&A session at the end of the webinar. So I'll now pass over to Chris Souness. So Chris leads Wimmera Southern Mallee Development, and he works across various sectors in Western Victoria, including agriculture, energy, mining and infrastructure, driving region-first solutions that keep community priorities at the centre. So he's based in Horsham and collaborates with councils, with industry and communities to make sure that local voices shape both state and national decisions. Chris is known for his practical approach, focusing on trust and transparency and delivering real outcomes through complex change. It's really wonderful to have you here, Chris. So please take it away.
No worries. Thanks for the introduction. And I just, as I say, first off, just acknowledge CPA's work and the usefulness of this guide. It is, as a regional leader, really good to have guides like this and really try and get thinking beyond transactional engagement by everyone. And I think this does a really good job of, getting people to think beyond the transactional. And often when I think some of the community discussions are framed, it does become transactional, which then I think lowers the tone of the conversation. I'm speaking from the Wimmera Southern Mallee, and we're a region that is in going through this shift. It's not just planning, it is occurring, and we're living through it. And what I'm talking about, and I do have a case study in the guide, is definitely not a finished product. And it didn't start off with saying, oh, I'm going to develop a case study out of this. It was basically things were, I wasn't feeling the conversation were working well, and I was going to, how do we actually keep on focusing going forward to make sure our community voice is part of the discussion? So I suppose this is a point of reflection, and it is a point in time, and I'm definitely not saying, oh, this is perfect or this is cut and paste. But at the time when it first started, it was really realising things weren't working, and sort of in hindsight, it looks like, we've started to build our own tools because mainly we felt that consultation wasn't cutting it. And I've sort of been in many meetings where consultation, I think now community see it as a weapon that governments and industry use to attack community, because consultation is done at communities rather than with communities. So it has, it's not a word that I don't think community take too kindly. They see it as a threat. I'm going to run a consultation meeting. They feel it as a threat. So it was just these issues were coming up time and again. And I thought, we're not going to get a perfect policy fix here. We've got to start looking at trying to do the systems ourselves, and how do we coordinate, track and push for fairer outcomes. And the first thing we did was took a group of community leaders up to the Surat Basin, Western Downs, because there was I'd seen a really interesting paper on that region, Toowoomba, Dalby, Roma, about how community and companies were talking past each other and the government was sort of not leading. And it was really going not well at all till the communities and companies started realising they had to sort of change the way they were talking with each other, and they started talking far better. So what we've done in our region is, the first thing I think we've done is we built a regional collaboration that holds weight. And a collaboration, and this isn't Wimmera Southern Mallee Dello, this is multi-party, multi-industry, multi-sector. It involves local government, involves traditional owners, it involves the state government, involves project developers, involves VicGrid, and involves community groups. And we're all working together. Clean Energy Council, with their awards next week, have recognised us as a finalist in the collaboration, which I think is a really great recognition for all the various players who have decided to come together and realise honest conversation is the best way to try and get better outcomes and build trust between one another. And this collaboration's been the foundation for everything else. Without trust between everyone, the tools don't mean much. So what are our tools? First tool we've got is Wimmera Southern Mallee Project Pathways, which is a process sort of to think about how projects can and should engage from the scoping to the delivery to the follow-up. Sort of helps build shared expectations between proponents, community and government, not just tick boxes and consultation by a tick box. It gives on-ground engagement leads something to anchor to. It also gives community a way to track what good process should look like. Then we've also got a bunch of tools called WSM Impact, which stands for Investment, Mobilisation, Participation and Coordination Tools. This links energy investment directly to housing, workforce and business outcomes. And what we learned from the Surat Basin, if this is done well, this is what's going to change the conversation in most communities. If we can get the housing, workforce and business outcomes that communities see and can feel, then I think energy starts to see as a valuable partner in the community. The energy system can't function without these, and communities can't absorb the scale of change without them either. We've stopped treating these as add-ons. They're central to getting the transition right. We've got a commitments register, which is a public tool that documents what's been promised. By who? By the developers, by the agency, by anyone, and actually then tracks what's delivered. It's written by the companies in their voice, and they do the tracking. But we're handling the we're going to be hosting on our website. We handle the follow up to make sure that they update it. And it's not about being punitive. It's about trying to be clarity, trying to help create shared accountability and create memory for the community, so the community can go to one spot and see what's going on. And once again, building trust. And I think for a lot of companies, they'll see it as a tool that actually increases their standing. And it helps reduce community fatigue and give councils and companies a baseline to improve trust. And really, what we're trying to celebrate with the Commitments Register is not what projects have to be done, because really, participation trophies, we all know, they're important, but in the end, it's actually, are you going above and beyond? So we want to recognise projects that go above and beyond what they have to do to what they want to do. And they're the things we want to get excited about in our community. And this probably, and the CPA touched on it in that presentation, Claudia, it was great. Kim, we have talked to. We think at this particular moment in time, when the trust is eroding, how the construction phase is undertaken is probably going to be more impactful on the thinking of the community than the community funds. The community funds are nice, but often they get thrown around as a look over here distraction by companies and government. And I actually think we think about in a regional development lens, what's going to have the most impact going forward, and give me the opportunity to go into any town and say, our community will be better off this project goes ahead with agriculture and energy coexisting in the next 3 years, because, and I want to be able to finish that sentence, it's how the construction phase is carried out, which is going to allow that sentence to be finished. Because that is actually the main game to start with. The community fund follows, and I think we've got to make sure we focus our efforts where we're going to have the most impact straight away. But in the end, all of this is, I suppose, nice words, because what actually matters is relationships. So tools don't mean anything unless the relationships are there, and that's what makes the system work. And this includes strong company-to-company relationships, which we've really actively supported, because we think that's important that the companies trust one another. Just like companies and communities, we want individual relationships there between the community members, the local communities, the local councils and companies in engagement and all levels, from the engagement lead to the CEO. We think these relationships, if they're going to be effective, need to be at multiple levels. If they're rushed or transactional, no framework will fix it. So what are my closing thoughts? I think the CPA guide is absolutely great, and I think everyone should read it from every angle you look at a project in a region from. It sort of helps try and bring a national structure to what of us have been building locally. And I think what we've all been building locally, and there's a lot of people across Australia working on this, is we all recognise we'd love to have some national leadership and things done nationally, but we also dealing with a problem here and now, and sometimes you've got to get in and get your hands dirty, and you can't wait for others. You just got to get in and make things happen. What we do in the Wimmera Southern Mallee is far from perfect, but we know that. But what we're trying to do is make it better. So we're, as I say, we're not asking for anyone to be perfect in the space. We know mistakes have been made and will be made going forward. But what we're wanting to do is how can we lessen those mistakes, and how can we all do better together? And I think we want everyone to own the transition instead of reacting to it. The challenge now is helping more communities get the space and backing to build their own version, and using what's useful from this guide and adapting the rest. One question I always have at the front of mind is who should pay for this? Because I don't really think at the moment rural ratepayers, rural residents, rural communities should have to subsidise the industry to get this right. So I think there needs to be a lot of thought of who should be paying for the community volunteer time and the community, I suppose, paid staff in the region to actually do the work from the community point of view, because I do really think there's a challenge here that we haven't fully thought through. In our region, the companies have come together, and they're working with us to make sure that, the rural ratepayers are not chipping in to work on the collaboration. But I think there's far more time put in it than what's that covering. And that's one question I always have in mind: who should actually pay for what has to be done on the community level? And then my final takeaway, and this is a rehash of what a farmer said to one of the collaboration events, and it's sort of stuck with me for the whole time. In rural communities, you don't have to like your neighbours. The reality is they often don't. But the reality is also that when there's a fire or a mob of sheep jump into a neighbour's paddock and box up, you have to stand together to get things done, to solve the problem, and you've got to move forward. so that when you go to the mailbox at the end of the lane and see your neighbour and you say hi, you know you still respect them, and even if you don't necessarily like them anyway, but you know you need to get along. And I suppose the point he said is, the point is, if you ever, where you won't raise your finger off your steering wheel when you're driving down the highway, you see someone from the community, you know there's a serious concern. And I think there are a couple of things that how rural communities work. And I think when companies try to work with rural communities, there needs to be flex on all sides. Obviously, rural communities are far from perfect, but I think if you're coming into a place, I think you should make an effort to try and understand that place and make sure that when you're driving your company vehicle down the road, the person driving the other way raises their finger to say hi as you go past. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. That was really nicely put. I think if we were all in the room together, we'd all be giving you a round of applause. Thanks. Yeah, I think I just want to reiterate what David Grant has said. It is a set of relationships that gives great hope for the future. It really is about what binds us, what connects us. So thanks again, Chris. Next, we have Veronica Terry. Veronica leads regional development at the Cradle Coast Authority in Tasmania's northwest. She believes renewable energy can drive a stronger, more exclusive future for her patch in northwest Tassie. And to realise this, Veronica works closely with councils and industries to maximise local benefits from development. And renewables are increasingly becoming part of that. So over to you, Veronica. Thanks.
Right. Thank you for having me, Liz and team. Really fantastic insights there from Chris. It's always great to hear Chris talk about everything he's doing. For those of you who aren't familiar with the northwest of Tasmania, the Cradle Coast includes the northwest and the west coast of Tassie, along with King Island. So essentially we run from Cradle Mountain down to the coastline. The Cradle Coast Authority is a values-led organisation that facilitates, promotes and advocates for sustainable development in our region. We support our member councils, we're a natural resource management organisation, and we're also home to the Future Energy Hub. The Future Energy Hub is made possible through industry partnership, and we thank TasNetworks for their consistent support that makes that possible. The Future Energy Hub has a facilitation role, and we are excited to work with major proponents in our region who are keen to collaborate and contribute to a positive legacy. We've also a community communications role, and we're a neutral conduit for information relating to the renewable energy shift. So this combination of community, industry, government and environment does equip us with the skills to provide multidimensional benefits and solutions. And at CCA, similar to many parts of the country, we want renewable energy to uplift our community as a whole. We want it to support small business, enable local opportunities and leave a positive legacy for future generations. And we can see that many regions around Australia share similar aspirations in different contexts. So the work of Community Power Agency and the work they've done here does provide a credible framework so regions around Australia can start strong and work meaningfully with diverse stakeholders. The framework will enable us to share learnings across the country, which I think will be brilliant, through a shared understanding while we all carve out our own distinctive paths forward. The Cradle Coast context comprises of our own mix of strengths and weaknesses, and we have a strong industrial past, and this is a strength and a weakness. This has created times of boom and bust, and our community remembers this. We have a strong history of renewable energy in Tasmania, with our first major hydropower project commencing operations in 1916, and sometimes this strong legacy acts as a weakness. It hides the fact that we're in an energy crisis and we still need to decarbonise industry and transport, such as cars and trucks. It hides the fact that there's still a lot of work to be done to decarbonise Tasmania, with 58% of our energy coming from petrol and diesel for transport and coal and gas for heavy industry and businesses. So our weaknesses can also serve as renewable energy opportunities with the right planning and collaboration. For example, we need to stop exporting our youth. We need to increase our workforce participation rates, including youth, retain our skilled migrants once they move to the region. We need to dramatically improve literacy levels, numeracy levels, and address entrenched disadvantage. And these opportunities are best activated by connecting meaningfully with our community who hold the answers. And we understand that there are many corners of the country with similar goals in mind. From our perspective as an organisation, we have strong connections with local leaders. However, to create a more inclusive economy and achieve our goal for renewable energy to uplift our community as a whole, we need to create safe spaces for underrepresented community members. And the tricky part is that our region has a population of 120,000 people. And this work needs to be done on a shoestring budget. We are fortunate to have proponents in our region who are keen to collaborate and meet regularly, and we are able to have frank conversations. This is, however, just one piece of the puzzle. So basically, the Community Power Agency work will help us to eat the elephant one bite at a time and to do what we can with the resources we have. When we demystify the process, we empower people, and this makes the work of the Community Power Agency so important. Creating structures to have respectful and collectively ambitious conversations. It empowers communities to better collaborate with each other and turn a shared vision into reality. So, yeah, thank you for the opportunity to talk about our patch, Liz. I'll pass back to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Veronica. Finally, we'll hear from Sarah now. Sarah Robbins from the Regional Australia Institute. And Sarah supports a national research program focused on strategic policy priorities for regional Australia. She's been tracking how benefit sharing is emerging across different parts of the country. And for the past 2 years, Sarah has been exploring ways to deliver positive outcomes for regional communities through the renewable energy transition. Thanks for being here, Sarah.
No worries. Thank you so much for having me. I'm here on behalf of the Regional Australia Institute. Some of you may be familiar with our work. We are a not-for-profit, non-government agency, and our purpose is really to empower regional communities to thrive. We work across a broad spectrum of regional development aspects, and our key vision statement or product is encapsulated in what's called the regionalisation ambition, and that's a kind of high-level plan for looking at really positive outcomes for regions across Australia over the coming decade. So the regionalisation ambition includes work on livability, sustainability, productivity and innovation, education, employment and population. So as you can see, it's the broad scope of regional development. Within that program of work, we have a really wonderful and quite unique program called the Intergovernmental Shared Inquiry Program, which is a partnership between the Commonwealth Government and state and territory governments, regional development departments. So through that partnership, each year the government partners identify a strategic priority that they want to focus on, and we deliver 1 or 2 major research projects. This year, our project has been looking at social licence and building a legacy for regional communities from the net zero transition, with a specific focus on the large-scale renewable energy infrastructure. It's actually the 4th project that we've done in the net zero series, with previous reports looking at vulnerabilities in fossil fuel dependent communities for small communities, medium-sized communities, and the barriers and enablers to transition. So today I'll just present a couple of key highlights from this year's report, and one of the key findings, which is that regional benefit sharing is a key opportunity of the renewable energy transition for regional communities. The report asked two key questions. The first question was, how can governments and industry build social license for large-scale renewable energy projects in regional communities? And the second is, how can we build long-term benefits for communities from the energy transition? And when we talk about long-term benefits, we've obviously talked about that full scope. We're talking about that full scope of regional development outcomes with lasting social, economic and environmental value for communities. So some really just brief and key findings that really echo what we've heard from Veronica today, and I spoke with both Veronica and Chris in the research project. Was one of the things is that regional communities are really still seeking clear information and meaningful engagement about renewable energy projects in their regions. There is still a sense that there is not enough information, not a clear enough rationale, not enough coordination, and in some impacts, such as Chris's region, really seeing the cumulative impact and engagement fatigue that occurs when there are multiple types of development in a region. A second key finding was that many communities are already undertaking really proactive planning and preparation to work in the renewable energy transition. Well, we've obviously heard some examples today, and there are just multiple examples emerging all across Australia that are highlighted in the report and also in the Regional Benefits Sharing Guide. And then the third thing that we heard around communities about building a legacy is that without exception, communities define building a legacy as a transition in which no one is left behind, a really strong focus on young people, which Veronica has also raised today, focus on livability, education and employment outcomes, pathways for young people, and housing and key infrastructure. So those are the kind of visions of communities. And then the question that is, to some extent answered by the Regional Benefits Sharing Guide is what are the mechanisms by which communities can harness those benefits and really see them delivered through renewable energy projects. Through the report, we've kind of come up with some of the key elements that we recommend to support regional benefit sharing. So first of all, as I've said already, this idea of regional benefit sharing is a key opportunity of the transition. So really looking at the strategic aggregation of funds from developers, but also funds from government. So what we've identified as the key elements are regional community plans, which is also reflected in the benefits guide. But one of the things that's really clear is that not all communities have the resources, the experience, the capability to deliver those themselves. So one of the things that we have recommended is funding, and it's funding from government. The recommendations in the report target the state and federal government, but it's around funding for communities to undertake those key tasks of education, engagement and planning. And obviously there is scope for developers to contribute to that through the regional benefits process as well. But I think we really need to be clear that there's a core role for government in developing that national vision of a long-term legacy outcome and then supporting regional communities to achieve that vision through funding. The second thing that we recommend is the local decision-making models. So as really reflected in the Regional Benefits Guide, that communities are really crying out to have a say in the benefits that are seen in their community and the direction of their communities. So looking at the most impactful and appropriate models for decision-making, and that's been really beautifully enumerated in the Regional Benefits Guide as well. And then the final thing, I suppose, is the concept of local legacy funds. So with the local legacy fund, or the aggregated benefits fund, as it's referred to in the Regional Benefits Guide, we're looking at developer contributions. And one of the things that the Regional Australia Institute would love to see is also strategic contributions from state and federal government to identify and support really building in those long-term legacy outcomes. So that can involve kind of strategic agreement making. It can involve looking at the pipeline of infrastructure development and funding for regions and working in a collaborative way to really bring those things together strategically to deliver the long-term outcomes. So there you go. That's a quick summary of what we've heard and what we've learnt, really reflected in the work that we've heard about today, and really closely aligned with what's come through in the Regional Benefits Sharing Agreement. So thanks for the opportunity. Our report will be released at the RAI National Summit in October.
Lovely. Thank you, Sarah. thank you to all of our speakers today. We still have about 15 minutes or so to move into Q&A. So we've gone a little bit over, but hopefully people can stay on the line so we can continue the conversation, and please continue to submit questions if you have them. So in terms of what's popped up so far, I think I might just try and combine the first couple of questions that have come through. So the first one is about what can you do if you're not in a position to lead or coordinate in a region, but you want to see things get started? For example, if your development agency or your council might be on the back foot and doesn't have capacity. And the second question is about funding available to set up these kind of regional benefit sharing programs. Who would typically drive or coordinate this setup? Claudia, shall I pass to you first?
Yeah, sure. And I apologize because I did have a slide on this, but I skipped quite quickly through it because I was getting close to time. But we've seen different types of organizations lead this kind of this process, from regional and economic development associations like the Wimmera Southern Mallee Development Group to council, to groups of councils and things like that. And so to answer the sort of the second question first, maybe about where does the funding come from to do this kind of process? It depends on the local circumstance and what's available, I suppose. We know councils are stretched, and I wouldn't be suggesting relying on their resources to undertake what is quite an intensive engagement co-design process. But industry may be in a position to contribute to the process and commit to implementing the outcomes from that process as well. And there might also be opportunities to tie in with state government. If you're in a renewable energy zone, the state government RES policy rollout process. So various engagements like res readiness planning and other engagements associated with that are being planned or undertaken. So having conversations with your contacts there within state government to try and tie into that process and sort of get some efficiencies there could be an option. There's also the opportunity to bring in external consultants like CPA and other groups that are working on this type of thing to help facilitate workshops and things like that, and possibly philanthropic funding to assist with that as well. Yeah, that's probably enough from me, but maybe someone else from the panel would like to speak to any of that.
I'm happy to have a couple of cents.
Thanks.
And I've probably typed in a bit of a long answer there in the chat too, and apologies about that. I think what that question is actually the hardest question you could ask, because there's no easy answer, and this is the challenge with community leadership. It is messy, it is hard. Most people in the community in a leadership role don't have any authority, and often you need a whole range of skills to do actually what Claudia just described, all the various things to do. It normally just doesn't sit with one person. So how do you get this coalition together, especially if there is unpaid, or if the people are in a paid role, but they're generally not going to be their main role? How do they actually get the resources that align with what they should be doing, with what they know needs to be done? And I think that's why I think lots of communities have a lot of challenges, because this is such a hard question to answer. I don't think the companies fully realise the challenge it is in making this happen, and so they sort of haven't realised the challenge with resourcing to make it happen. And also, as I say, thinking when you start going to government grants, how that can get you a little bit, but generally it's very specific what you can do, and there's more what you can't do with a government grant than what you do. And then with the philanthropic funding, that is also a minefield, because generally philanthropic funding, they'll have a particular greater cause they're working towards, and a lot of philanthropic groups may not have the same values as rural communities. Some of them do, some of them don't, but they may encourage you to go down a certain pathway, which for a lot in the community might not resonate. It might resonate with some people in the community. So it creates all sorts of tension. So there is nothing easy in this. And this is where I actually think it's best if communities and companies can have honest conversation. And this is where possibly I think some of the field staff, if they were more empowered by their company teams and were given more power to support community leadership and actually help groups be not constructive, maybe they'll be combative, but actually help that to occur, the projects will be far better off, because the communities will be able to have those honest conversations they need, because they're being asked to change a lot. And I think that's often not fully appreciated. So no easy answer, sorry, but it needs to be done, and urgently.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chris.
I can add something as well.
Please,
That's
Veronica.
great. Yeah. From our perspective, we're not nearly as far down the track as Chris is with the work that he's been doing. But the way we're looking at it is trying to incorporate the community benefit sharing conversation into a broader roadmap for the region type future visioning conversation. We're in a funny kind of position. We're in Tasmania, some great work's being done by RecFit, but we've got a lot of uncertainty around what's happening with our government, and we currently don't have any clarity around what that looks like in the coming weeks or months. And so there's a lot of good work that might not end up coming to fruition in relation to community benefits, which kind of puts that on hold. But from our perspective, the conversation we can have with our community is, what does our community want for the future? And how do we cultivate that sort of seedbed for conversations so that we're at least getting ready to support our member councils to do whatever it is they need to do.
Thanks, Veronica. I might move on to the next question. This is from Melissa Key. Are there any councils or regions that have successful pool fund programs already? Understanding that some councils may have investment restrictions due to their SFBA investment power classifications. And I'm assuming that you're referring to the Statutory Funds Borrowing Authority, Melissa. Is there anyone on the panel who would like to tackle that one?
I can have a go first, just in terms of, like, the first thing I would say is that this concept of regional benefit sharing is emerging in Australia, and we haven't really seen any robust examples of pooled central funds being administered in this context yet. In saying that, there are a lot of regions having these conversations. So in the guide, there's a few case studies on this, one of which is Banana Shire Council. They're exploring a community legacy fund that's up in Queensland. There's also the example of, state res delivery bodies like Energy Co and their pooled res access fee funding that, for example, has created a grant program in the Central West Orana res. I think it's called the Community and Employment Benefit Program. So yeah, different example because it's state government facilitated, but there's something there. There's other examples from different contexts. So, for example, the Lake Macquarie Foundation or the Gladstone Community Charity Fund, and many others, that call themselves community foundations or community funds. But in terms of the question around the investment capacity of council, that's definitely maybe a limitation on the option of having council actually hold and administer those funds, but we're not in a position to give specific legal advice or anything like that. So I'd encourage anyone to that's exploring that to seek professional legal advice on that front. But there is in our guide a whole table in the appendix that provides some general advice on sort of the advantages and limitations of different entities holding the funds, which is kind of, I touched on that in the presentation around being limited to the jurisdictional or legal purposes of the entity that's holding the funds. So I think without answering your question very well, I just want to point out that it's a great question and certainly something that needs to be considered when thinking about which entity is best placed to pool, administer and invest funds. Yeah, really exciting to see how this emerges, especially with some of those examples that are in the guide and around the country. Yeah.
Thanks, Claudia. I'm going to move on to a question from Eleanor Barnes now around co-design. So she's asking, do you think community expectations have shifted over time in response to co-design opportunities? And also what the biggest lessons are around what works and what doesn't work when co-designing with communities? Chris.
Yeah, I'm happy. And I come from a background working in agriculture and agricultural extension predominantly, where co-design is the predominant way of operating. And I suppose co-design is where you enter the room not knowing what the outcome is, and you put everything on the table and you sit down together to work it out. Generally, when most people use co-design these days, they don't actually mean co-design. So, and I'll work with Eleanor, and she's part of the collaboration, and I really value her input. So this isn't a criticism of any particular company or anything like that. It is just, I think we just really got to be clear in what is actually up for discussion when we talk about co-design. And that's actually the hardest part, because when trying to design a project, there is stuff that isn't up for discussion. And as soon as, and this is the same with consultation at the moment, consultation is generally about informing, while some in the community still think consultation is about, oh, we have an opportunity to say, no, this project can't go ahead. And so when those expectations are far apart and the wording isn't quite right, then it becomes harder. So it's really important to be upfront and honest about what's on the table. And as I say, I think Cubico are doing a great job, but it's in a really tough environment. And once that trust has been eroded, and it might be not what Cubico done, it might have been what the neighbouring project's done, it might have been a transmission line project that did it, might have been a mining project that did it. All of these things are happening and they all impact on one another. And once that trust is broken, it's broken for all. And this is why the collaboration, I think, is so important. But also it is really important to be clear what you mean with words that have very different meanings in different environments. And in an agricultural community, co-design generally means sitting down with everything on the table, which, for my understanding of the energy projects and partners I've talked with, generally that's not the case. Not everything can be on the table. And I think that's where some of the challenges arise.
Thanks, Chris. That actually leads really nicely into a question from Don Thompson. He's asking, one of the key challenges is that until projects have achieved their final investment decision or approval, there's reluctance to invest money in benefit sharing programs, especially where it's true benefit sharing, not marketing. And this is also when the biggest ask of communities is to involve them in co-design processes. So the question is, what opportunities are there to use regional benefit sharing approaches to share the cost or the resourcing of getting these regional approaches moving?
Once again, I can talk about my Panglossian world I live in. And for the people who don't know what a Panglossian world is, I encourage you to look it up. Pangloss is the Wikipedia term you probably type in. But the Panglossian world I live in is where companies, instead of putting some of their business development costs and then their construction costs in very separate buckets, the construction phase of the project goes, actually, if we get this built quicker and do it well with the community, then and we give that money to the business development, then that actually will mean our costs are less. So we can actually do that, because at the moment the business development teams are under-resourced and not given permission to actually do what needs to be done, and they say we can't do it to get financial closure. Yeah, I just really think it's a failure of the way the companies are structured up internally and they manage their costs. It's silo thinking, and we're in a systems world. So Pangloss, for those who understand, is basically just a person who believes no matter what's going wrong, always be hopeful.
That's a good sentiment to have. Veronica, did you have something that you wanted to add?
Yeah, well, there was some good work done in Tassie with the discussion paper that was released by RecFit last year, and that one of the suggestions was that the state government sort of pitch in at the start, and it'd be fantastic if state and federal governments were interested in genuinely participating in those sorts of programs.
Just to add to that as well, I think the example that I gave before about Banana Shire Council and their Community Legacy Fund, I believe has been aided with some investment from the state government, and also that the planning amendments up in Queensland around mandating councils to negotiate community benefit agreements with developers could be an opportunity to provide a degree of certainty and sort of legal commitment to a regional benefit sharing program, which I talked a little bit about in the presentation. But yeah, to provide some certainty to communities about what's to come, and in terms of financial commitments and things like that.
Thanks, Claudia. There's a couple of questions coming in just around the social impact assessment and community benefit agreement negotiations that are happening in Queensland. Question for the panel around thoughts on how local councils can be supported to make sure that these negotiations are meaningful for their communities. And I think there was also another in relation to this as well. Is it adequate to provide true community benefits? So I guess, the question is, how do we ensure it does? And what sort of support will councils and communities need?
Just following on from that, because I sort of spoke to this before, I think there's a real need to be transparent with communities in negotiating these kinds of agreements. And obviously it's very new in Queensland, so there might be some trial and error there. But I think as well, I remember Chris emphasised this in his speech, that it needs to be that relationship between developers or companies, renewable energy projects, and the community needs to withstand, any kind of mediation of council with the developer or something like that. And I guess what I'm trying to say is that we don't want to divorce local communities from renewable energy, from that process of building relationships with renewable energy developers and companies. So I think there's a role for council to play there in crystallizing an agreement that works for community and the region, but also ensuring that communities do have that direct line of communication with renewable energy developers that are developing projects in their region. Yeah, I might throw it to someone else on the panel if they want to add into that. Unfortunately, we don't actually have anyone from Queensland, I don't think, but maybe Sarah, you have a national focus, so maybe you can speak to that a little bit.
Just before
Yeah, and look, sorry, go for it.
I'll go after you, Sarah.
No worries. Yeah, look, I guess I was just going to say that it really does come back to that kind of question of who is responsible. And I think in these early stages where it's legislated in in Queensland, and also in other states, that community engagement needs to be budgeted for and undertaken in a really meaningful way. Then there is that opportunity to work with communities effectively to support local governments in capacity building, and also to support that engagement process. So one of the things that I think that Veronica mentioned is around being able to access and include vulnerable communities and communities that, groups in the community that aren't often engaged in those processes. So I think that there's really an opportunity with this change in legislation in Queensland and nationally to think about who's best placed in the community, and local governments are in a really strong position to support engagement with all the different sectors of the community, and for funding to be provided from both industry and government to undertake those engagement processes to really make sure that local governments are accessing, supporting and representing all the views of communities.
I'll just add to that, probably adds to the complexity, is I think one thing is the local government is a form of democracy, and every generally in Victoria, every 4 years, councillors change. And as one ex-CEO said in a collaboration meeting, which I think resonated a lot with the companies, because she asked the question what their relationship was with the local councils, and all of them said, "Oh, absolutely great. We meet with the CEOs every time we're up, or regular once a month or whatever it might be, and we have a great relationship." And she sort of just reminded them about how local government works and what the role of the CEO is, and her understanding of the role. And she was a council CEO at one stage. Was there's only two things the CEO really has to do. One is make sure councillors don't do anything illegal, and secondly is do as they say. And with democracy, so that means your relationship with the CEO. The CEO is there to make sure the councillors get what they want done. They do have a power to interact with the CEO and direct which direction. So you've got to realise local politics is super important, and councillors change every 4 years, and you can get a total new councillors set with a totally different direction quite easily. And sometimes companies, I think, are naive. They think the council CEO is like the CEO of their company that has power, but no, it is the council CEO is very aware of where they sit in the hierarchy. And I think a lot of people forget that. So I think we've got to always consider that. The other part of the challenge with local government, and this is possibly why I think community leadership is often the local council has a role in regulating the projects. So the relationship with a company when you're the regulator, it can be very different to when you trying to build trust. And there's this tension, because if you've got the big stick, sometimes you're going to be a bit wary of your trust of what you say. While if you're dealing directly with a community as in the leadership role, the community only has trust is in the thing. You can either build trust with that community or you can break trust with that community. They have no big stick to hit you with, except saying, "Oh, you're a problem child to deal with," or "You're absolutely the best company we've ever dealt with." That's all you've got is reputation on the line. And sometimes I think that's important, especially when it comes to grants. Also, local councils generally want to be able to apply for grants and get investment in local assets they're responsible for. So it makes it very problematic, I think, in a governance sense, if you want to sit on both sides of the line. If you want to be in charge of handing the money out, but you also want to allocate it to some of your assets, it creates governance challenges, which I think we've got to be aware of and honest with the community and local government. These are real challenges that we need to sort out. Otherwise, we're just making problems and paying for those local councils, which I don't think they deserve.
Thanks, Chris. I think it is definitely an evolving space in Queensland, you know, as other states also, but this new legislation will definitely be interesting, and we're navigating it as well. And just want to reiterate that if there are councils in Queensland that are looking for support, we're really keen to be able to provide what assistance we can. Unfortunately, we've really come to the end of the session today, so we need to wrap it up. I just want to thank you again, Claudia, Chris, Veronica, and Sarah, and everybody who's also made the time to join the session today. We really hope that the guide can be a practical tool to strengthen the way that benefits are shared in regions that host renewables, ensuring that it can be good for both people and for the places that have this infrastructure. So if you'd like to chat more, please get in touch with Claudia or myself, and we'll also follow up with the guide and the recording after the session. So thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.